Hi, and welcome to episode number 3 of the 12-part series that I'm doing regarding elder law, what I always call Elder Law 101. This is the updated version of a series that I did in 2023, in which what I try to do is cover all of the issues that a senior might face from even before they were a senior to after they're dead. And so I'm going to review the episodes with you so that you can see whether or not this episode is for you, or whether it's a different episode that you should be watching, or when you finish, whether there are some of these other episodes that you think may be relevant. So I start in episode number 1. It deals with incapacity and estate planning before you're 60. So before you're retired, you're still young. There are still some issues that you may want to face, especially in terms of making sure you have a power of attorney, healthcare proxy, some other things. And then I talk about issues in your 60s, that you have in your 60s, when many people are retiring. A lot of people are figuring out whether they want to take Social Security, whether they want to take Medicare. There are a lot of issues. And then your 70s, this presentation, which really talks about whether you're now thinking about maybe you want to downsize, maybe you want to prepare for maybe when you get older and you're frail. We're going to talk about that today. In episode number 4, talks about income tax basics for seniors. Income tax meaning both the regular income and capital gains tax, because there are a variety of aspects of those taxes that are especially relevant to seniors. I talk about life in your 80s. I have a separate one dealing specifically with how you can qualify for Mass Health, or the Massachusetts name for Medicaid, specifically if you are in a nursing home or need a lot of care at home. In order to avoid going to a nursing home, it's always amazing to people when I tell them they can always qualify for Mass Health. I have one specifically devoted to the last year of your life, which you may be living right now and not know it, but we talk about the various issues that people need to kind of think about when they're thinking about their last year. I do an episode on dealing with what you've left behind, whether it's by going through the probate process or you've got assets that were in trust with death beneficiaries, all of those issues. I have one episode specifically dealing with trust, all about trust. Talk about revocable trust, irrevocable trust, lifetime trust, testamentary trust. And this may be beneficial to you no matter what other presentation you're seeing, because there's often a trust component to any of these presentations. Episode 10, we talk about dealing with the kids and the grandkids. That is, once you're dead and things are getting distributed, what's the best way to do that? And how do we deal with your family situations in the best way? Episode 11, I'm talking specifically about your Medicare package. These presentations were originally designed to be done across a year. And so that's the presentation that I would typically do in November, because review of your Medicare package is always typically in November. And then finally, 'tis the season. I talk about issues that you often face at the end of the year, and seniors have some specific issues around this, especially around dealing with your RMD, your required minimum distribution. And I talk about giving. So, going back to where we are today, dealing with your 70s or planning to stay home. I always talk about my friends Frank and Mary and their kids Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr. And I always say, if you're old enough to get the joke, you're old enough to be my client. And if for Frank and Mary in their 70s, one of the things, or their goal in life is pretty simple, and it has been throughout their lives. They want to live in their house until they die. They want to be buried in the backyard. So the question is, when you're 70, are there some things that you need to be doing in order to facilitate that? And by the way, we're assuming here that Mary's sister Peg has the same issues. She has one daughter, Peg Jr., also called Peggy, but she also just wants to stay in her house until she dies and be buried in the backyard. And there's the house. So the question is, there are really a couple of questions. So the question is, if they want to stay in the house, what kind of risks do they want to look at in order to deal with being able to stay in that house until they died? And one of them is at any age, of course, you can fall down, but you get to your 70s and it just gets more likely that something might happen, that you just might fall down, right? And that you just might be in a position where you are more frail than you are now. And I know we all hope that that's not going to happen to us. But hope is not a plan. You can hope that it's not going to happen, but there's nothing wrong with having a plan B just in case that happens. So we're going to assume, in terms of this plan, for Frank and Mary, that they own their home. If they live in Metro West, it's worth about $400,000. That Frank has IRA's worth about $400,000. They have joint savings of $300,000, so their total assets are $1.1 million. That the same situation, if Frank and Mary live on the islands, that is Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, everything's the same except that same house, not on the beach, is worth $1 million, and therefore their total assets are worth about $1.7 million. And I mentioned these two groups because many of my clients are in the Metro West area, where my office is in Westboro. And I have a lot of clients also on both of the islands because I've been going to one or the other island every Thursday now for almost 15 years. The joke is at the office, it's Island Day, for which I get a lot of grief during the good weather because people are always saying, oh, where are you working today? Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. But the point is, my clients, it is always assumed that all these people are wealthy but my clients, the money flies in, the money flies out. My clients are the people who really live on Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. So, what are your planning goals if you're Frank and Mary and you're in your 70s? You want to make sure the house is safe. You want to make sure the house is affordable, because you want to make sure that you have the ability, if something goes wrong with the house, to take care of the house. And you want to make sure that there are funds for home care, because there are two possible reasons why you would have trouble living in that house. Some have to do with the house, the others have to do with you. So if the house is, the boiler blows up, the septic system is gone, something big happens, you need the money to pay for that. If a problem happens with you, so that you can no longer live in this house unattended, right? You may need some assistance yourself. So you need to kind of figure out what the cost of all of that would be. Now, my biggest advice to you is, when you're starting to think about this, and say you're in your 70s and people are starting to think about it, and you're just kind of worrying about it, or you're putting it out of their mind because you just can't think about it, the best solution is talk to somebody who does this stuff. The easiest place to find those people is typically by talking to folks at the senior center, because they're dealing with folks who are seniors who are asking these kinds of questions, and they therefore are also dealing with the people who have the answer to a lot of those questions. Talk to the people in your Elder Services or Elder Services Access Point, ASAP. The state is divided into areas. In each one there is a nonprofit organization or Aging Services Access Point, or ASAP. In the Metro West area, it was called Bay Path Elder Services. It is now called Springwell. In the Cape Cod or the islands, it is called Elder Services of Cape Cod and the Islands. So they can advise you regarding a lot of these services. Finally, talk to a geriatric care manager. Geriatric care managers, these are people who are typically nurses or social workers who decided that they especially liked working with seniors, and so they wanted to spend their time dealing with senior issues, right? And if you contact me, because you've seen the seminar, I'd be glad to give you some suggestions for geriatric care managers who work in your area, or you can talk to the folks at the senior center or at the ASAP. So your first set of questions is your house safe? Not necessarily is your house safe right now for you because you're a really healthy person, but will your house continue to be safe as you get more frail, right? And do you want to start adapting that house so that you don't find out that you're too frail for that house after it's too late because you got hurt? So do you want to make sure that you have the ability to get upstairs in this, once again, the standard house that most people grew up in, have bedrooms in the upstairs, or they have the washer dryer in the basement. So one of the first things you need to figure out is how to get that washer dryer out of the basement. But if you've got bedrooms upstairs, do you want to put in a home elevator? Elevators, I would suggest this 15 years ago, and people would be like, an elevator? And that was, the cost was like $150,000 to get an elevator. Elevator costs have now gone down to, in many places, like in the 60s. And you can often design the elevator into your house, not if it's a really old house because the rooms tend to be too small, but if it's a house that was built, say, after 1940, 1950, so that it really kind of blends in with the house. What about grab bars in the bathroom? I have them, right? We just moved to an over 55 community. I'm 75. My wife is going to be 74 this year. We moved because I wanted a place that had no stairs, parking under, and an elevator, which is what we've got. So that there's no more trudging through the snow with groceries and falling down, you know. There's no more scraping the windshield, you know. So it may be but that's an issue. But for your own house, if you can't, you know, get rid of the house if you don't want to move from your house, you may be able to adapt some of this stuff. Like, for example, in the bathrooms with grab bars, maybe better lightings, other improvements that can promote safety. As examples, elevator, chairlift, grab bars, ramp, right? And then there are the improvements that you need to make sure you have money for, just because they break. Stuff breaks, you know, over time. And right now your furnace may be working fine, or the hot water heater, or the roof may be okay, or the septic system. But you need to know that you have enough money in reserve so that if any of those things you have to deal with, you can deal with them. Because you're assuming, at this point, I'm assuming that by the time you're in your 70s, you're not getting a lot of new income in. So you kind of have to deal with what you have. Or do you have the money to pay for home care? So if you do become frail, and so you really kind of can't get around as well, and you know your spouse, that's great that if you have a spouse, in the case of Frank and Mary, but you know if she's the same age as you, this isn't a big help. You know, if you need to kind of get around, you can certainly talk to your kids about doing this. Although we, for example, have 3 children: one in Washington D.C., one in Austin, Texas, and one fighting fires. He's a firefighter in Arizona. They're all wonderful kids, but they've all got, you know, day jobs and lives, and one of them has children of their own. You know, they've got things that they've got to do. So you shouldn't be assuming, even if the kids are closer, that if you had these kinds of frailty issues, that your kids are going to be able to do all of this stuff, right? And so what you need to do is kind of estimate ahead of time what might be the cost of your home care. So when you're thinking about this, once again, you can try to hope this away, you know, and I won't need it. The kids are going to do it. My neighbors have always said they'll come. Hope is not a plan. Think about whether or not you can really figure this out. Now, when you're thinking about that, here are just some thoughts for some parameters. Forget about 24/7 care. You're never going to afford 24/7 care. That's more expensive than going to a nursing home, right? 24/7, there are 8,760 hours in a year. These are the things you have to know as an elder law attorney. Average cost of home care right now is actually a little bit higher than this, but say it's $25 an hour. So your cost of being at home with 24/7 care is about $219,000 per year. That's more than a nursing home. If, on the other hand, you say to yourself, well, I can't plan for 24/7 care, but I could plan. The real question would be, if one of either Frank or Mary were unwell and the other one were taking care of them, or they were both unwell and one of the kids were doing it and stepping in, but couldn't do it all the time, right? How much would it cost to take care of some of the basics so that Frank and Mary could stay in their house, so that they could get help with dressing up in the morning, toileting, getting ready in the morning, showering, maybe some, you know, meal prep, right? Figure, and this is, you know, I do nothing but this kind of work, so I see this kind of stuff. 4 hours a day is not a bad estimate for what it would take for a lot of people to be able to stay at home, even if they're having some problems walking, if they've got some other issues. 4 times $25 an hour, times 365 days, so this is every day. The cost would be $36,500. If you were assuming that you needed that care for a prolonged period, and I'm assuming 5 years, that means you need to know that you have $182,500, right? So the cost of staying home in terms of home repairs that we just estimated, was $100,000. The potential cost of home care is $182,500. Total $282,500. Remember Frank and Mary's situation, right? They have assets which are okay, you know. They have $1.1 million. If they're in Metro West, they have $1.7 million in assets, although a lot of that is tied up in the house, right? So they have the ability to cover this stuff, but you know, but the question is, especially if you're in Metro West, do you feel comfortable that these resources that you have, the $700,000 that you have, is going to be able to cover all of those things while at the same time covering kind of your house expenses, given the fact that your total income is only $3,000 a month? Where's the money for a rainy day? Where it is really is in the house. So the question is, how can you use your house to be the backup in case your cash just isn't enough? Well, there were really a couple of alternatives that I want to talk to you about. One is the HELOC, which most people are aware of, the home equity line of credit. It used to be called the home equity loan. One is the reverse mortgage, and then there's also tax deferral. You have the ability to, if you own a house in a town and you've been living there for a prolonged period of time, to get your taxes deferred if your total income is below a particular number. And we'll talk about that just a little bit. First of all, the HELOC. Here's how a HELOC works. You go to the bank and they evaluate your house and they say, and they look to the value and they say, well, we're going to be willing to lend you 75% of the value of the house, which in the case of the $400,000 house in Metro West would be $300,000. We will lend you up to that amount of money, and the closing cost is fairly low. It's typically like less than $1,000. And basically, what a HELOC is, it's a line of credit that is secured by a mortgage. So you basically get this amount of money that you can borrow anytime, like a big credit card. And unless you've borrowed money, you don't owe any interest on the money that you've borrowed. But once you've borrowed it, then you do owe money, right? And the way that typically the way that works is that the amount that you owe monthly, and all you owe is the interest on the amount that you have borrowed, right? The way these HELOCs typically work is that they extend for an initial period, which is the period during which you can use that line of credit. Typically, that's 10 years. At the end of that 10 years, the mortgage runs for another 10 years, but during that 10 years, your monthly payment, instead of being just the amount that the amount of interest that you owe, ends up being the amount that you need to pay on a self-amortizing basis, so that at the end of the 10 years, you don't owe anything at all. As a result of that, and when the bank is trying to qualify you for this HELOC, they're going to figure out what that payment would be, that big payment for that last 10 years, not what the interest might be during the first 10 years, because they want to make sure that you have the ability, as you get older, to pay this off. Well, Frank and Mary, remember, only have income of $3,000 per month. This is going to be a really big payment. That's the reason why most homeowners, when they go to get their HELOC, find out that what they can really get the bank to lend them is much less than what they thought in terms of the value of the house. The other issues are, if you've gotten a HELOC, you have to stay the owner of the house, and the house is due on transfer. If you sell the house, the mortgage is due. That is, the principal and the outstanding interest. Or it's due on death. That's a HELOC. What's a reverse mortgage? A reverse mortgage is very, very much like a HELOC, in that it is a credit card that is secured by a mortgage. If you were, but as opposed to the HELOC, where the calculation of how much they'll lend you is based on your ability to pay, your income. With a reverse mortgage, there is no income calculation because nothing is owed every month. If you borrow on the reverse mortgage, the amount that you borrow starts accruing interest, but at the end of the month, if the interest doesn't get paid, and you can always pay it if you want, if the interest doesn't get paid, it simply gets added to the principal. So the following month, the principal goes up by like this little tiny amount, which is why the amount due on the reverse mortgage, gradually goes up over time. For example, if you had a reverse mortgage and you were 70, the total, because the amount that they lend you is based instead on how old you are, the value of your house and how old you are. Typically, they'll lend you a percentage of that value. Or if the house is worth a tremendous amount of money, there's a cap on the value that they use in the calculation. I think it's about $900,000 now. But in the case of Frank and Mary's house in Metro West, today, regarding the house that they have, the $400,000 house, they could borrow at 70 about $280,000, or excuse me, $218,000. That line of credit, the amount that they have available, increases every year regarding the amount that they haven't used yet. So if they haven't used the $218,000 in the first year, the following year their line of credit goes up to 5% plus the $218,000. If they've used some of the money, so they've got a remaining line of credit of $200, then at the end of the year that line of credit goes up by 5% from $200 to $210,000. Now, the disadvantage of the reverse mortgage is there's a very high closing cost. And when I say and one of the reasons for that is, the reason why reverse mortgage companies lend or are willing to lend, despite the fact that they realize that there is certainly a theoretical possibility that at the point at which you owe the money, that is when you're dead or when you sell the house, the mortgage is going to be upside down because you're going to owe more than the value of the house. The only reason why they're willing to do that is because all of these loans are federally insured. Reverse mortgages, the allowance of reverse mortgages was created through legislation that was passed actually in the last year of the Ronald Reagan administration in 1980. This was a Republican initiative designed to allow people to be able to stay in their homes. And so these are FHA insured mortgages. But as a result of which, by the way, they're very heavily regulated. But the point is, the way that the FHA pays is they have a mortgage insurance pool into which everybody who gets a reverse mortgage contributes. And there's a big initial contribution that has to be made, and that's most of that $16,000 if you're doing a reverse mortgage on a $400,000 house. Now, for many people who don't need the money right now, but they just want to know that they have this reverse mortgage in reserve, they'll actually take out the reverse mortgage. They'll pay the $16,000 in closing costs by simply borrowing that out of the amount that they're borrowing, right? So that the total amount that they owe once they have the reverse mortgage is only $16,000, on which a tiny amount of interest accrues every month, which ends up expanding that $16,000, but it's very small. The point is, with reverse mortgages, there are no monthly payments. The reverse mortgage is due on the sale of the property, or 1 year from death, or 1 year after you are in a nursing home, which may be a disadvantage to you, so you want to consider it. But the point is, for folks like Frank and Mary who are concerned about cash flow, this is very handy. Finally, there was a program that is actually run by the state of Massachusetts called the Home Modification Loan Program. So if you're modifying your home in such a way as to take care of problems that you are now having, this can't be done in anticipation of problems. But if you are frail now, if you have problem getting up the steps, if you need many of the modifications that I talked about earlier, you can get a loan for that of up to $50,000. It's no interest. There is a maximum on the amount that you can earn, right? Your annual income. But look, it's $190,000. Every single one of my clients qualifies for this home modification program. There are no payments that are due until the sale or the transfer of the property, right? So if you're planning on staying home, then you may want to think in advance about some of this stuff. But what if you've decided that you just can't stay home? That this just isn't going to work out for you, either because you are now frail or you're worried about getting frail, and you just know that no matter what you do to this house, you're still going to have, the car outside that you need to shovel the driveway and the steps in the front, and you just are worried about all of that stuff. So you're thinking about moving. So let's talk a little bit about moving. Let's pretend that we're Frank and Mary now and we're 80 years old. And there's Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr. And your goals are, once again, you want to live in your house until you die. You want to be buried in the backyard. You want to live a happy life, and you want to avoid spending on a nursing home. So you're trying to structure things so that you can meet all of those goals. Well, what if you can't, though? What if you can't meet all of the goals? And what if you need a plan for protection also if you ever need a nursing home? Well, one possibility that people will think about is, well, is your home designed so that one of your kids, like Mary Jr., could move into the house and therefore take care of you if you became frail? Well, there are a number of issues that could arise in that situation, and I'm just kind of mentioning one. You know, what you can do is you can build a room, but you need to make sure that the zoning is going to allow you to do that, especially if there's a separate bathroom, and especially if there's a separate kitchen. By the way, this is simply allowed as a matter of right well, not necessarily building an addition,